12 of the most expensive medical specialists in the world stood in a circle, watching a billionaire bleed out from the inside. They argued over rare synthetic poisons and Russian neurotoxins, their expensive leather shoes squeaking against the imported marble floor. In the corner, scrubbing vomit from a gold-plated trash can, was a 22-year-old maid making minimum wage. She didn't have a medical degree, but she knew the smell of cheap dirt and old rust, and she knew exactly what was killing the boss. The master bedroom of the Moretti estate smelled like a hospital that had been violently shoved inside a luxury hotel. Underneath the lingering, expensive notes of sandalwood and cedarwood, there was the sharp, unmistakable stench of ammonia. It was the smell of failing kidneys. The air was thick, heavy with the heat radiating from 12 different bodies crammed into the space. The humid exhalations of panicking men and the rhythmic, synthetic hiss of a mechanical ventilator. Lara kept her head down. She dragged a damp microfiber cloth across the mahogany nightstand, her knuckles white, her hands raw and stinging from the harsh industrial bleach she'd been using all morning. Keep your head down. Wipe the surfaces. Empty the bins. Do not look the men in suits in the eye. That was the rule. On the center of the massive king-sized bed, surrounded by a tangle of translucent tubes and glaring monitors, lay Leo Moretti. 3 weeks ago, he was the untouchable apex predator of the city's underground, a man who wore tailored Italian suits like armor, whose voice alone could clear a crowded restaurant in seconds. Now, he was just a bag of failing organs wrapped in sweat-soaked, 1,200 thread count Egyptian cotton. His skin had taken on the color of dirty dishwater. His lips were cracked, crusted with dried blood that looked like rust in the harsh fluorescent lighting they had dragged in. The tox screen is still inconclusive, Dr. Pierce said. He was a tall, angular man with silver hair and a watch that cost more than Lara's entire life. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, staring at an iPad. Liver enzymes are elevating at an unprecedented rate. It has to be batrachotoxin, or a modified ricin derivative, a targeted assassination attempt. Ricin doesn't cause this kind of neurological degradation, argued Dr. Gallagher, a younger specialist flown in from Johns Hopkins. He smelled strongly of stale coffee and nervous sweat. He scrubbed a hand over his face. Look at his hands, the tremors, the localized muscle fasciculations. It's a synthetic neurotoxin. The cartel has been developing untraceable variants. Lara moved to the other side of the bed, kneeling on the thick Persian rug. She reached under the bed frame to pull out the sterile basin they'd been using when Leo couldn't stop throwing up. It was heavy. It smelled sour, of bile and half-digested stomach lining. She held her breath, ignoring the slight tremor in her own arms, and swapped it for a clean one. 12 doctors. 12 of the most highly decorated, outrageously compensated medical minds on the eastern seaboard. They had been in this room for 48 hours, barking medical jargon, ordering emergency dialysis, pumping the Mafia boss full of broad-spectrum antidotes, immunosuppressants, and experimental chelators. And Leo was only getting worse. Lara stood up, backing away into the shadows near the heavy velvet curtains. She watched Victor, Leo's right-hand man, pace the length of the room. Victor was a wall of muscle squeezed into a tailored charcoal suit. His jaw was clenched so tight Lara could hear his teeth grinding from 10 feet away. He had a hand resting permanently on the butt of the Glock holstered at his hip. "I don't pay you to guess," Victor snarled, his voice a low, gravelly threat that made two of the younger doctors flinch. "I pay you to fix him. You have blank checks. You have whatever equipment you want. If he stops breathing, none of you walk out of this house." It wasn't an idle threat. Lara had worked here long enough to know the dark, wet stains on the basement concrete weren't from spilled wine. She turned her attention back to the bed. Leo's head lolled to the side. A low, wet groan rattled out of his chest. His eyelids fluttered, revealing the whites of his eyes, which were heavily stained with yellow jaundice. He was dying. That much was obvious, even to a maid. But the way he was dying didn't make sense to Lara. She walked over to the adjacent bathroom to dump the dirty basin. As she poured the foul-smelling liquid down the porcelain drain, she thought about the doctor's arguments. Synthetic poisons, cartel hits, high-tech biological warfare. They were looking at him like a billionaire mafia boss. They were looking for an enemy worthy of his status. Lara dried her hands on her apron. She walked back into the room, carrying a fresh stack of damp, warm towels to clean the dried sweat from Leo's neck. As she approached the bed, Dr. Pierce stepped back in frustration, nearly colliding with her. "Watch it, girl," he snapped, not even looking at her face. To him, she was just part of the furniture, a mop with a heartbeat. Lara murmured an apology and slipped past him. She leaned over Leo. The heat rolling off his skin was immense. She gently dabbed the warm towel against his collarbone. He groaned again, a weak, pathetic sound. As she wiped the crust from the corner of his mouth, his jaw went slack. His mouth fell open. Lara froze. The room around her was a cacophony of alarms, arguing specialists, and Victor's heavy, pacing footsteps. But all of it faded into a dull roar. She stared into Leo Moretti's mouth. His gums were swollen, inflamed, pulling away from the teeth. But it wasn't the swelling that caught her eye. It was the color. Tracing the exact line where his teeth met his gums was a stark, distinct ribbon of deep purplish blue. It looked like someone had taken a cheap blue ballpoint pen and traced the inside of his mouth. Lara's stomach dropped. The fine hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She knew that line. She had seen it before, far away from Italian marble floors and billionaire estates. She had seen it on the hollow, gray-faced men sitting on dilapidated porches back in Peaker, Oklahoma. The Burton line. It wasn't a cartel neurotoxin. It wasn't a Russian synthetic poison. It was lead. Pure, overwhelming, catastrophic, heavy metal poisoning. Lara stumbled back a half step, her heel catching on the edge of the rug. She looked at the IV bags hanging above Leo's bed. The doctors were pumping him full of drugs meant to flush out organic toxins, drugs that put immense strain on the kidneys. If his kidneys were shutting down from lead poisoning, those drugs weren't saving him. They were executing him. Lara retreated to the corner of the room, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her palms felt slick with sweat. She wiped them furiously against the coarse fabric of her black apron. Lead! It was absurd. It was impossible. Lead poisoning was a poor man's disease. It belonged to the forgotten towns built on the bones of old zinc and lead mines, towns like the one she had clawed her way out of. It belonged to kids who ate paint chips off crumbling public housing walls, or men who breathed in toxic dust at unregulated smelling plants. It did not belong in a $50 million penthouse overlooking the city skyline. "His heart rate is spiking," one of the monitors shrilled as a nurse called out the numbers. "He's going into tachycardia." Push another 20 milligrams of the chelator, Dr. Pierce ordered, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. And get the dialysis machine prepped. We have to filter the poison out of his blood before his liver completely necrotizes. Lara chewed on the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper. No, she thought. The chelator they're using is for iron and copper. It's the wrong kind. It's just going to bind to his internal organs and tear them apart. She looked around the room. How was he getting it? Heavy metal poisoning at this acute stage wasn't from breathing in smog. He was ingesting it. Massively. Daily. She needed to find the source. If she just walked up to 12 Ivy League doctors and a trigger-happy Mafia enforcer and told them they were wrong, they would just laugh her out of the room. Victor would likely shoot her for interrupting. She was a high school dropout who cleaned toilets. She had no authority. She needed proof. Lara slid along the wall, pretending to tidy the clutter of medical packaging left on the sideboards. She scanned the room. Leo was a creature of intense, uncompromising habit. He trusted almost no one. He didn't eat food from unvetted restaurants. His private chef, a terrified French man named Henri, cooked all his meals from scratch using ingredients flown in daily. It wasn't the food. Water. No, the estate had a state-of-the-art reverse osmosis filtration system. Lara knew because she was the one who had to descale the massive tanks in the basement every month. She moved toward his private sitting area, a small alcove off the master bedroom separated by glass doors. The doctors hadn't bothered to occupy this space. It was Leo's sanctuary. 2 heavy leather armchairs sat facing a fireplace. Between them was a solid oak side table. Lara stepped into the alcove. The air here was stale, smelling strongly of old cigar smoke and expensive bourbon. She looked at the table. On a silver tray sat a crystal decanter. It was a heavy, ornate thing, intricately cut and undeniably antique. It belonged to Leo's grandfather, the man who had started the family business on the docks 70 years ago. Leo drank from it every single night. A ritual. 2 fingers of bourbon, a splash of water, and a twist of lemon. Lara reached out. Her fingers hovered over the glass. "What are you doing over there?" The voice was like a whip cracking in the quiet alcove. Lara flinched violently, knocking her hip against the heavy oak table. She turned. Victor was standing in the doorway of the glass partition, his dark eyes locked on her. He didn't look angry. He looked hollowed out, exhausted, and incredibly dangerous. I was just going to polish the tray, Mr. Victor," Lara stammered, her voice thin and reedy. "The dust." Victor stared at her for a long, agonizing second. "Leave it. Get back to the towels. If he sweats through those sheets again, change them." "Yes, sir." He turned his back, marching back into the fray of medical monitors. Lara exhaled a shaky, ragged breath. She looked back at the decanter. She couldn't touch it now, but she leaned in, bringing her face inches from the heavy crystal. It was old. True antique crystal wasn't just glass. It was leaded glass. Up to 30% lead oxide to give it that brilliant, sparkling clarity and heavy weight. But people knew better than to store alcohol in it long term. Lara squinted at the base of the decanter. There was a dull gray seam running along the bottom, stretching up toward the neck. A repair job. Someone had dropped it years ago, and to preserve the heirloom, they had it soldered back together. Lead solder. Lara closed her eyes. The pieces snapped together with terrifying clarity. Bourbon is acidic. Not incredibly acidic, but enough. But Leo didn't just drink bourbon. He drank it with a twist of fresh lemon peel. He left the alcohol sitting in this repaired lead-heavy vessel for weeks at a time, letting the high acidity of the lemon and the alcohol leach massive, concentrated amounts of heavy metal directly into the liquid. He was taking a daily concentrated shot of poison, thinking he was honoring his grandfather. "His blood pressure is crashing," Dr. Gallagher shouted from the main room. 60 over 40 and dropping." Lara's eyes snapped open. "He's in renal failure." Dr. Pierce's voice rose in pitch, losing its polished calm. "The toxins are overloading his kidneys. Push the diuretics. Hit him with 80 milligrams of furosemide stat." Lara's blood ran cold. Furosemide, a loop diuretic. It would force his failing kidneys to flush fluids rapidly. If his kidneys were clogged with heavy metals, hitting them with a massive diuretic wouldn't save him. It would blow them out completely. It would kill him in less than 10 minutes. She looked at the decanter. She looked at the door. If she spoke up, she was risking her job. Her life. The Mafia didn't reward insolence, but if she didn't speak up, a man was going to die on that bed because 12 geniuses were too busy looking for a dragon to notice a termite. Lara grabbed the heavy crystal decanter by its neck. The main bedroom had descended into controlled chaos. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor had dissolved into a frantic, erratic chirp. Nurses were tearing open sterile packaging, throwing plastic wrappers onto the floor. Dr. Gallagher was leaning over Leo with a stethoscope pressed hard against his chest, his face pale. "Pushing 80 of furosemide," a nurse said, her hands trembling as she uncapped a large syringe and moved toward the IV port on Leo's arm. "Stop!" The word tore out of Lara's throat before she could stop it. It was loud, harsh, and utterly foreign in the sterile, high-stakes environment. It didn't sound like a maid. It sounded like a threat. The room froze for a fraction of a second. 12 doctors, 3 nurses, and 1 Mafia enforcer turned to look at the girl in the black apron standing at the edge of the carpet. Lara's chest heaved. She was clutching the heavy antique decanter in her right hand like a weapon. The amber liquid inside sloshed violently. "What the hell is this?" Victor demanded. He didn't yell. His voice dropped an octave, a lethal quiet that made the hair on Lara's arms stand up. His hand drifted to his hip. Dr. Pierce looked at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. "Get this girl out of here. We are in the middle of a code." He turned back to the nurse. "Push the drug. If you push that diuretic, his kidneys will rupture, and he will be dead in 5 minutes." Lara screamed, her voice cracking. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't wait for Victor to draw his gun. Driven by a blind, stupid surge of adrenaline, Lara lunged forward. She shoved past Dr. Gallagher, her shoulder slamming hard into his chest. He stumbled backward with a yelp of surprise. Lara reached the IV pole and swatted the nurse's hand away, just as the needle met the plastic port. The syringe clattered to the marble floor, rolling away under the bed. "Are you insane?" Dr. Pierce roared, grabbing Lara by the shoulder. His grip was surprisingly strong, his fingers digging into her collarbone. Before he could throw her back, Victor was there. He grabbed Lara by the back of her neck and her apron strap, hoisting her off the floor. The fabric choked her. She gasped, dropping the decanter. It hit the thick Persian rug with a heavy, muffled thud, miraculously not shattering, but spilling expensive, poisoned bourbon across the carpet. I'm going to put a bullet in your head, Victor hissed, pressing the cold steel barrel of his Glock directly under her jaw. Give me one reason not to paint this wall with you. Lara's knees gave out, her body weight supported entirely by Victor's grip. Tears of sheer terror pricked her eyes, hot and fast. Her hands shook violently. She was terrified. She was a dead woman. His gums, she choked out, fighting against the pressure on her throat. Look at his gums. The blue line. She's hysterical, Dr. Pierce spat, kneeling to retrieve the syringe. Victor, get her out. He's crashing. I said, look at his mouth, Lara shrieked, kicking her legs. It's not a cartel poison. It's lead. You're treating him for organic neurotoxins. You're frying his organs. Victor hesitated. The absolute certainty in the terrified girl's voice caught him off guard. He looked at the doctors. What is she talking about? It's nonsense, Dr. Gallagher said, though he looked uncertain. Heavy metal poisoning doesn't present with this acute neurological crash. It's too slow. It does if he's drinking massive doses of it every single night, Lara yelled, pointing a shaking finger at the spilled decanter. That glass, it's lead crystal. It's been repaired with lead solder. He drinks acidic bourbon and lemon out of it. It's leaching. Dr. Pierce scoffed, his face red with fury. This is absurd. Lead poisoning takes years. He would have shown symptoms ages ago. He did, Lara argued, the adrenaline stripping away her manners. He's been complaining of stomach pains for months. I'm the one who cleans his bathroom. He's been vomiting for weeks before he collapsed. You just gave him a pill for an ulcer because you didn't bother to actually look at him. The room was dead silent, save for the frantic beeping of the heart monitor. Look at his gums, Lara pleaded, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. Just look. It takes 2 seconds, please. Victor stared at Lara. Her eyes were wide, terrified, but unwavering. Slowly, he lowered the gun. He kept his grip on her collar but shoved her aside. He walked over to the bed. Victor, we don't have time for this, Dr. Pierce started. Shut up, Victor growled. He leaned over his dying boss. With 2 thick, calloused fingers, Victor reached down and roughly pulled Leo's lower lip down. He stared. Dr. Gallagher leaned in, adjusting his glasses. He peered into the boss's mouth. The color drained from the young doctor's face so fast, he looked like a corpse himself. Oh my God, he breathed. What? Victor snapped. What is it? The Burton line, Gallagher whispered, stepping back, his eyes wide. He looked at the spilled decanter, then back at the bed. It's a distinct blue-purplish line along the gingival border. It's a classic textbook clinical sign of severe chronic lead poisoning. Dr. Pierce froze. He dropped the syringe. He pushed past Gallagher and looked for himself. He stared at the blue line, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The brilliant, expensive specialist looked utterly lost. Is she right? Victor demanded, his voice dangerously low. Were the drugs you were giving him killing him? Gallagher swallowed hard. If it's heavy metal toxicity, the chelators we used are ineffective. And the furosemide, pushing that much through lead-compromised kidneys. He trailed off, looking at Lara like she was a ghost. It would have caused total renal failure. She just saved his life. Victor slowly turned his head to look at Lara. Lara was pressed against the wall, rubbing her sore neck, taking ragged, shallow breaths. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt sick. She felt like she was going to throw up the cheap toast she had eaten for breakfast. Change the protocol, Victor said to the doctors. It wasn't a request. Now, the room exploded into a different kind of chaos. The useless IV bags were ripped down. Gallagher started shouting orders for EDTA, a specific chelating agent used for heavy metals. The panic was gone, replaced by frantic, focused action. They finally knew what they were fighting. Victor slowly walked over to Lara. He towered over her. He reached down and picked up the heavy, empty crystal decanter from the floor. He stared at the dull gray solder lines on the base. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Lara," she whispered, keeping her eyes fixed on his expensive shoes. Victor reached into his jacket pocket. Lara flinched, bracing for the gun. Instead, he pulled out a thick wad of cash, $100 bills bound with a rubber band. He pressed it into her trembling hands. "Go to the kitchen, Lara," Victor said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "Get yourself a cup of tea. Sit down. When he wakes up, he's going to want to meet the maid who outsmarted 12 doctors." The industrial kitchen of the estate smelled like roasted garlic, brown butter, and bleach. It was a chaotic, beautiful smell that usually brought Lara a small sliver of comfort. But right now, it just made her want to vomit. She sat on a stainless steel prep stool, her knees pulled tight to her chest. Her cheap canvas sneakers scuffed against the rungs. Her entire body was vibrating. It wasn't a subtle shake. It was a violent, teeth-chattering tremor that started in her marrow and radiated outward. The adrenaline that had propelled her to scream at a room full of millionaires and shove a doctor was draining away, leaving behind a cold, hollow terror. She had put her hands on a Maid man. She had knocked over a nurse. Victor had put a gun under her chin. Lara pressed her forehead against her knees, wrapping her arms around her legs. She felt the thick, hard lump of cash shoved into the front pocket of her apron. It felt heavier than a brick. It felt like blood money. Or worse, a severance package right before you disappeared. Across the massive butcher block island, Henri was moving with the frantic, terrified precision of a man who knew his boss might die before dinner. He was chopping celery for a clear consommé, the heavy German steel of his knife hitting the board in a rapid, staccato thwack, thwack, thwack. He hadn't asked why Lara came into his kitchen looking like she had seen a ghost. In this house, you didn't ask questions unless you were prepared to scrub the answer out of the floorboards later. "Drink," Henri grunted. He slid a heavy ceramic mug across the stainless steel counter. It stopped inches from her elbow. Lara lifted her head. It was tea, dark and steeped too long, smelling sharply of mint and honey. "Thank you," she managed. Her voice sounded like crushed gravel. She reached for the mug. Her fingers were shaking so badly that the hot liquid sloshed over the rim, scalding her thumb. She winced, sucking air through her teeth, but didn't drop it. The heat of the ceramic grounded her, just a little. She took a sip. It burned the roof of her mouth, sweet and astringent. What the hell did I just do? She shouldn't have said anything. She should have let them pump him full of diuretics. She should have kept her mouth shut, packed her cleaning supplies, and taken the bus back to her cramped, moldy studio apartment in the garment district. Leo Moretti was not a good man. He ran dockside rackets. He destroyed lives. If he died, the world wouldn't mourn. But she couldn't just watch them kill him out of sheer stupidity. It offended her. The absolute blind arrogance of those doctors, standing around in their Brioni suits, refusing to look at the man's physical body, because they were too busy looking at his net worth. The heavy swing doors of the kitchen pushed open with a soft whoosh. Lara froze, the mug suspended halfway to her mouth. Henri stopped chopping. The sudden silence in the kitchen was deafening, save for the low hum of the commercial refrigerators. Victor stood in the doorway. He had taken off his suit jacket. His white dress shirt was wrinkled, the top button undone, his tie pulled loose. He looked like he had aged 5 years in the last 20 minutes. The dark circles under his eyes were bruised and heavy. He didn't look at Henri. His dark, flat gaze found Lara perched on the stool. "He's stable," Victor said. His voice was a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the stainless steel prep tables. "Gallagher started the heavy metal chelators. The kidney function is leveling out. He's conscious." Lara swallowed hard. The tea suddenly tasted like acid in her throat. She carefully set the mug down on the counter. She didn't say anything. What was there to say? "You're welcome for not letting you murder your boss." Victor walked further into the kitchen. His leather shoes clicked against the quarry tile. He stopped a few feet from her, crossing his arms over his chest. The holster strapped to his ribs was glaringly obvious now without the jacket. Dr. Pierce tried to say the diagnosis was a joint effort, Victor said, a dark, humorless smirk touching the corner of his mouth. "Gallagher shut him down," said the maid caught it. Lara wiped her sweaty palms on her apron. I saw the line. That's all." "Yeah, you saw the line." Victor tilted his head, studying her like a puzzle he couldn't quite put together. A 22-year-old high school dropout sees something 12 of the best diagnosticians in the country miss. "How?" "I'm from Pitcher." The words felt heavy on her tongue. Victor frowned. "Where?" "Pitcher, Oklahoma," Lara repeated, staring at the scuff marks on the toes of her sneakers. "It's a ghost town now. The EPA bought it out and condemned it. It used to be the biggest lead and zinc mining town in the world. The chat piles, the toxic dust from the mines, were huge. We used to play in them when we were kids. Half the town had lead poisoning. You learn what it looks like. You learn how the skin goes gray, how the stomach cramps hit, how the blue line shows up on the gums. You just know it." Victor was quiet for a long time. The only sound was the distant hum of the fridge. "Come with me," he finally said. Lara's stomach plummeted. "Where?" "Upstairs. I need to finish the downstairs bathrooms, Mr. Victor. The shift manager will dock my pay if I don't." "Lara," Victor interrupted, his voice devoid of warmth. "The boss wants to see you. Now." Walking back into the master bedroom felt like walking onto a stage after the play had already ended. The frantic energy was gone. The room smelled different now. The sharp tang of ammonia was being actively filtered out by a massive humming air purifier someone had dragged in, replaced by the sterile chemical odor of IV saline and antiseptic wipes. The crowd had thinned. Dr. Pierce was conspicuously absent. Dr. Gallagher was sitting in one of the leather armchairs in the alcove, rubbing his temples, looking thoroughly defeated. 2 nurses hovered quietly near the monitors, and in the bed, Leo Moretti was awake. He looked terrible. His skin was still that awful grayish yellow, and his dark hair was plastered to his forehead with stale sweat. The tubes were still there, feeding the new chelating agents into his veins, slowly grabbing the heavy metals in his blood and binding to them. But his eyes were open. They were dark, bruised, and sharp as broken glass. Lara stopped at the foot of the bed. She felt small. She felt stupid in her cheap black uniform and her stained white apron. She kept her hands clasped tightly in front of her to hide the shaking. Victor stepped up to the side of the bed. "This is her," he murmured. Leo didn't move his head. Moving clearly cost him too much energy. He simply shifted his eyes, fixing that intense, heavy gaze on Lara. The weight of his attention was physical. It made the air in the room feel thin. He didn't speak immediately. He just watched her. He took in her scuffed shoes, her frayed hem, the way she was digging her fingernails into the back of her own hand. "A maid," Leo rasped. His voice was a ruin. It was gravel and sandpaper, weak and breathless, but it still carried an undercurrent of absolute authority. Lara nodded once, a jerky, nervous motion. "Victor tells me," Leo paused, taking a slow, rattling breath, "that you shoved a Johns Hopkins nephrologist and threatened to let me die if they pushed a diuretic." Lara's face flushed hot. "I didn't mean to shove him, sir. He was just in the way." A sound escaped Leo's throat. It took Lara a second to realize it was a laugh. It sounded like dry leaves scraping across pavement. It triggered a wet, violent cough that rattled his frail frame. The nurses stepped forward, but Victor waved them back. Leo recovered, swallowing hard. "In the way," he repeated, a faint morbid amusement dancing in his dark eyes. "My $1 million medical team. In the way." He shifted slightly against the pillows, wincing as the movement pulled at his IV lines. "Gallagher." The young doctor scrambled out of the armchair, hurrying over to the bed. "Yes, Mr. Moretti." "Explain it to me again. What was killing me?" Gallagher swallowed, clearly terrified of the man in the bed, even in his weakened state. "Acute lead toxicity, sir. Massively accelerated by the acidic nature of your evening bourbon combined with the lemon peel. The lead solder in the antique decanter was dissolving directly into the alcohol. And the treatment Pierce was giving me," Gallagher looked at the floor, "it was contraindicated. The chelators were designed for organic neurotoxins, and the furosemide would have forced your kidneys to process the heavy metals too quickly. It would have caused a catastrophic renal failure. It would have killed me." "Yes, sir." Leo stared at the doctor. The silence stretched until it felt like a piano wire pulled taut, ready to snap. "Get out." Gallagher blinked. "Sir, I need to monitor the EDTA drip. Show Victor the dosages. Tell the nurses what to do. Then get out of my house. All of you. You're fired." Leo didn't raise his voice. He didn't have the strength to. But the cold, absolute finality in his tone sent a shiver down Lara's spine. Gallagher nodded quickly, his face pale, and retreated to the monitors to brief the nurses. Leo turned his eyes back to Lara. The amusement was gone. Now he just looked calculating. He looked like a man trying to determine the exact value of the asset standing in front of him. "You noticed the Burton line," Leo said softly. "Yes, sir." "You knew what it meant because you grew up in a toxic dirt patch in Oklahoma." Lara shifted her weight. "Yes, you risked your job, and probably your life, to scream at men who have spent a decade in medical school." Leo's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why?" The question caught Lara off guard. She looked at him, really looked at him. Strip away the silk sheets, the penthouse, the armed guards, and the millions of dollars, and he was just a dying man. He was just another victim of the same slow, agonizing poison. She had watched hollow out her uncle back in Peacher. "I don't know," Lara said, and it was the truth. I hate watching people be stupid when someone is hurting. It makes me angry. They were looking at your money. They weren't looking at your mouth. It was right there. Leo stared at her. For a fleeting second, the hard, cynical mask of the Mafia boss slipped, revealing something exhausted and profoundly lonely underneath. To be surrounded by people you pay to keep you alive, only to realize the only person who actually saw you was the one you paid to scrub the toilet. "What is your name?" Leo asked. Lara Vance. Wait, no. Lara Hayes." She corrected herself quickly, her cheeks burning. "Lara Hayes," Leo repeated. He tasted the name. "You saved my life, Lara Hayes. In my world, a debt of blood is a heavy thing. What do you want?" Lara gripped her apron. She felt the wad of cash in her pocket. "Nothing, sir. Mr. Victor already... He gave me money. I'm fine." "Victor gave you tip money," Leo said dismissively. "I am asking you what you want. You want a house? A car? You want your student loans paid off?" "I don't have student loans. I dropped out." Lara backed up a half step. The intensity of his gaze was making her skin prickle. "I just want to go back to work. If I don't finish my shift, they'll fire me." Leo stared at her, utterly baffled. "You just saved my life, and you are worried about the housekeeping manager firing you?" "I need the health insurance," Lara mumbled, defensive. "My mom is sick." Victor snorted from the side of the bed. It was a harsh, abrupt sound. Leo closed his eyes. He looked exhausted. The conversation was draining the last of his meager reserves. When he opened his eyes again, the brief moment of vulnerability was gone. The boss was back. "Victor," Leo whispered. "Yeah, boss." "Fire the housekeeping manager. Fire the whole agency." Lara's jaw dropped. "Wait, no. Please, you can't." "Lara Hayes," Leo interrupted, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You are done scrubbing toilets. You are done worrying about health insurance." "I don't want a handout," Lara said, her voice rising in a panic. She didn't want to owe this man anything. She didn't want to be entangled in his dark, violent world. She just wanted to be invisible again. "Please, just let me go back downstairs." "You aren't getting a handout," Leo said, his eyes locking onto hers, pinning her in place. "You're getting a new job." Lara stood frozen at the foot of the bed. The air in the room felt thick, heavy with the expensive scent of the air purifiers and the lingering metallic smell of her own fear. "A new job," she repeated. The words felt clumsy in her mouth. "Yes." Leo shifted slightly, letting out a low, ragged sigh. He looked at Victor. "Clear the room. Nurses, too. Tell them to wait in the hall." Victor nodded. He gestured to the two remaining nurses with a flick of his wrist. They didn't argue. They practically sprinted for the heavy oak doors, leaving the room in a heavy, oppressive silence. It was just the three of them now. The dying king, his enforcer, and the maid. "I pay a fortune for security," Leo began, his voice little more than a coarse rasp. "I have men who check my cars for explosives. I have software that encrypts my communications. I have a chef who buys ingredients from vetted suppliers." He paused, a weak cough rattling his chest. Victor stepped forward with a glass of water, holding the straw to Leo's lips. Leo took a sip, leaning back against the pillows. "But none of that matters," Leo continued, his dark eyes fixing on Lara. "Because 12 of the most expensive medical professionals in the world stood in this room and almost executed me with a diuretic because they couldn't see what was right in front of them. They couldn't see the dirt. They couldn't see the reality." He raised a trembling, pale hand, and pointed a finger at her. You see the reality. You saw a repaired crystal glass. You saw a blue line on a dying man's gums. You saw what they missed because you aren't looking at my bank account. You're looking at the dirt. Lara's heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't like where this was going. Mr. Moretti, I just got lucky. I recognized a symptom from my hometown. I don't know anything about your business or security. I don't need you to know about my business, Leo said flatly. I have Victor for that. I need someone who pays attention to the things I overlook, the things my enemies will use because they know I overlook them. You want me to be a what? A food taster? Lara asked, her voice hitching. I want you to be my shadow, Leo said. The words carried a quiet, terrifying weight. You don't clean anymore. You don't wear that cheap apron. You shadow me. You look at my meals. You look at the rooms I walk into. You look at the people I meet. If something smells wrong, if something looks like a patched-up decanter, you tell me. Lara took a step back. No. The word hung in the air. Victor's posture stiffened immediately. His hand drifted casually toward his hip. Leo didn't look angry. He looked vaguely amused. No, I can't, Lara said, her voice shaking, but her jaw set tight. She looked at the tubes running into his arms. I'm not a bodyguard. I'm not a spy. I'm a 22-year-old girl who needs to go home. You live in a world where people try to kill you with synthetic poisons and car bombs. I live in a world where I clip coupons for canned soup. If I stay near you, I become a target. I won't do it. She reached into her apron pocket, pulled out the thick wad of $100 bills Victor had given her, and placed it on the foot of the bed. The money felt greasy. Thank you for the offer, Mr. Moretti. I'm glad you're not going to die today. But I quit. She turned on her heel and started walking toward the door. Her legs felt like jelly, but she forced herself to put one foot in front of the other. She expected Victor to grab her. She expected to feel a hand clamp down on her shoulder. She reached the heavy brass doorknob. Her hand wrapped around the cool metal. Your mother is at St. Jude's Memorial. Leo's voice drifted across the room. It wasn't loud, but it stopped Lara dead in her tracks. She froze. The blood drained from her face. Stage 3 ovarian cancer, Leo continued, his voice calm, conversational. She's on a waiting list for a specialized immunotherapy trial. But her insurance, the one you're so worried about losing, denied the coverage. They said it's experimental. So she's getting standard chemo. It's destroying her immune system, and it's not shrinking the tumors fast enough. Lara slowly turned around. Her breathing was shallow. How do you know that? Victor runs a background check on everyone who works in this house, Leo said. Even the maids. We know your debts. We know your mother's prognosis. We know she has maybe 6 months left on the current regimen. Lara's vision blurred. The edges of the room seemed to tilt. Don't you talk about her. I can put her in the trial tomorrow, Leo said. It wasn't a threat. It was a simple transaction. The casual wielding of absolute power. I can buy the wing of the hospital. I can fly the lead researcher to New York on a private jet. I can give her the best chance at life money can buy. He let his head roll on the pillow, looking at her with those dark, bottomless eyes. Or you can walk out that door. You can take the bus back to your apartment. You can go back to clipping coupons, and you can watch her die, knowing you could have stopped it. Lara felt sick. The nausea clawed at her throat. She looked at Victor standing stoic by the wall, and then at the dying man in the bed. They weren't grateful. They were predators. She had shown them a skill, and instead of thanking her, they had built a cage around her in less than 5 minutes. She had saved his life, and in return, he had taken hers. Lara looked at the brass doorknob under her hand. She let go. She walked slowly back to the foot of the bed. She looked down at the wad of cash she had tried to return, then picked it up, slipping it back into her pocket. The weight of it anchored her to the floor. "What time do I start?" Lara asked, her voice hollow. Leo Moretti closed his eyes, a faint, satisfied smile touching his cracked lips. "You already have." The first thing Lara lost was her invisibility. For 3 years, she had been a ghost in a black canvas apron. People looked through her. They stepped around her mop bucket without breaking their conversations. Now, she was impossible to ignore. Victor had taken her to a boutique on Fifth Avenue. He didn't ask her what she liked. He simply pointed at a rack of neutral tailored clothing, and an hour later, she walked out wearing a $2,000 charcoal wool blazer and silk trousers that felt like water against her skin. The fabric was too light, too quiet. She missed the heavy, coarse friction of her cheap jeans. The new clothes felt like a uniform for a different kind of servitude. A week had passed since Leo Moretti's collapse. The massive medical equipment had been wheeled out of the master's suite, replaced by the quiet, heavy atmosphere of a man rebuilding his empire from an armchair. Leo's recovery was brutal, ugly, and private. He refused to go to a hospital. Lara watched him force himself to walk the length of the room, his breathing ragged, his skin slick with a cold, gray sweat. The heavy metal collators ravaged his system, pulling the lead from his bones, but leaving him hollowed out. He was a predator, learning how to bare his teeth again. And Lara was always there. She stood in the corner of his study. She sat in the passenger seat of the armored SUV. She watched him eat. She watched him read. She became a piece of the furniture, just like before. But this time, the furniture had a purpose. "Stop chewing the inside of your cheek," Leo said. He didn't look up from the leather-bound ledger on his desk. The only sound in the room was the scratch of his fountain pen and the rain lashing against the bulletproof glass. Lara stopped chewing. She tasted a faint drop of blood. "I wasn't." "You were," Leo rasped. His voice was slowly regaining its old dark timbre, though it still broke if he spoke too long. "You do it when you're thinking about the hospital." Lara's stomach tightened. He was right. She had visited St. Jude's yesterday. Her mother had been moved to the private oncology wing. The room smelled of fresh lilies and expensive, sterile linen. The lead researcher had shaken Lara's hand, calling her mother's sudden enrollment in the trial a miraculous stroke of administrative luck. Her mother had looked so small in the bed, but her eyes were bright with a hope Lara hadn't seen in years. Lara had smiled, held her mother's thin hand, and felt like the biggest liar in the world. "She responds well to the new treatment," Leo said, turning a page in his ledger. "The tumor markers are stabilizing." "You monitor her medical charts?" Lara asked, the hair on her arm standing up. Leo finally stopped writing. He capped the pen, the faint click echoing in the quiet study. He looked at her. His eyes were dark, devoid of warmth, but sharp with intelligence. "I monitor my investments, Lara. You are a very expensive investment." He leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his legs. He looked exhausted, but the dangerous aura around him was returning. "Tell me what you saw today." It was their new routine. A test. Lara crossed her arms over her chest, digging her fingers into the expensive wool of her blazer. She hated this part. She hated that she was good at it. "The new security guard by the west gate," Lara said quietly. "He's left-handed." "Go on." "He wears his holster on his right hip. He draws across his body. It's awkward. He told Victor he was ex-military, military police. But a trained MP wouldn't wear his weapon on his non-dominant side unless he was trying to hide a shoulder injury he didn't disclose on his medical evaluation." Leo stared at her for a long, silent moment. "Anything else?" "Henri's sous chef," Lara continued, her voice flat. "He smells like cheap peppermint schnapps and stale tobacco. He's masking a day-drinking habit. His hands shake when he plates the appetizers. He dropped a paring knife twice today." Leo didn't smile, but a shadow of approval flickered in his eyes. He picked up his phone, dialed a single digit, and put it to his ear. "Victor," Leo said quietly, "fire the new guard at the west gate. He lied on his physical. And tell Henri if his sous chef drinks on the clock again, I'll cut off his thumbs." He hung up. Lara felt sick. She had just cost 2 men their livelihoods based on a passing observation. She was no longer just watching the dirt. She was throwing people into it. "You look horrified," Leo observed. "I didn't mean you should hurt them," Lara shot back, her voice shaking slightly. "The sous chef probably just needs help." "I don't run a rehabilitation clinic," Leo said, his tone utterly devoid of empathy. "I run a business where a shaking hand holding a knife near my food could mean a lethal mistake. You did your job. You saw the reality. Don't look away from it now just because it's ugly." He stood up heavily, leaning his weight on a silver-handled cane. He walked around the massive mahogany desk, stopping inches from her. He was taller than her, and even sick. He possessed an overwhelming physical presence. He smelled of expensive sandalwood and the faint metallic scent of his medication. "You belong to this world now, Lara," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur that made her skin prickle. "You can hate me for bringing you into it. But don't lie to yourself. You were meant for the dark." The air in the private dining room of Il Mastro was thick enough to chew. It smelled of roasting garlic, expensive Barolo wine, and the nervous, sour sweat of men who knew they could be killed before dessert. Lara stood in the shadows near the heavy velvet drapes, a silent fixture in her dark suit. Her heart was beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This wasn't the estate. This was the wild. Leo sat at the head of the long oak table. He looked composed, a perfectly tailored ghost, sipping sparkling water. Victor stood directly behind his right shoulder, his face a stony mask, his hand hovering near his jacket. At the opposite end of the table sat Dominic the Ox Russo. He was a capo from the Brooklyn faction, a massive, barrel-chested man with a booming laugh and eyes like dead black stones. He was here to offer a tribute, a celebration of Leo's miraculous recovery from his sudden illness. "We were worried, Leo," Dominic boomed, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "The rumors. They said you were on your last breath. A bad stomach bug, they said." "A bad bottle of bourbon," Leo corrected smoothly, his voice betraying none of the physical agony it cost him to sit up straight in the wooden chair. "I'm changing my suppliers." Dominic laughed. It was a loud, hollow sound that echoed off the brick walls. "Well, to celebrate your return to the land of the living, I brought you something. You can't trust the bourbon, But you can trust the old country. Dominic snapped his thick fingers. The door to the private room opened. One of Dominic's men, a wiry guy with a twitch in his jaw, carried a large ornate wooden box into the room. He set it carefully on the center of the table and unlatched the brass hook. Inside, nestled in dark straw, were 3 bottles of wine. Amarone della Valpolicella, 1995, Dominic said, his chest puffing out with pride. From a private cellar in Verona. Unopened. Untouched. You can't buy this, Leo. You have to bleed for it. A generous gift, Dominic, Leo said. He gestured slightly with 2 fingers. Victor, open one. Victor stepped forward. He pulled a heavy corkscrew from his pocket. Lara watched. She wasn't looking at the bottles. She was looking at the wiry man who had carried the box. He was stepping back into the shadows near the door, trying to make himself small. He was breathing through his mouth. His pupils were blown wide, black swallowing the irises despite the bright chandelier overhead. But it was his hands that caught Lara's attention. He was rubbing his thumb raw against the side of his index finger. A frantic, repetitive motion. He was terrified. Victor peeled the dark foil from the top of the first bottle. Lara moved closer, slipping out of the shadows. The scent of the roasted garlic from the dinner plates was overwhelming, but underneath it she caught something else. It wasn't a smell. It was an absence of smell. Old wine cellars have a distinct odor. Damp earth, mold, aged cork. The wooden box sitting on the table didn't smell like a cellar. The straw inside the box looked old, but it smelled like absolutely nothing. It had been sterilized, bleached, and dried. Why would you sterilize the packaging of an antique wine? Victor twisted the corkscrew deep into the cork. He braced his hand against the neck of the bottle and pulled. With a soft, wet pop, the cork came out. The scent hit the air instantly. It was faint, masked by the heavy smell of the food, but Lara caught it. It didn't smell like fermented grapes or rich oak. It smelled sharply sweet, almost exactly like the cheap almond extract her mother used to put in sugar cookies at Christmas. Almonds. Lara's brain flatlined. She remembered a true crime documentary she had watched in her tiny apartment. She remembered the doctors in Leo's room arguing over poisons. Cyanide. Victor reached for a crystal wine glass, holding the bottle over it. Lara didn't think. There was no time to formulate a professional, discreet warning. She just reacted. She surged forward from the wall, her low-heeled shoes skidding on the polished hardwood floor. She didn't yell. She just threw her entire body weight against Victor's arm. The collision was clumsy and violent. Victor, caught off guard, stumbled sideways. The heavy glass bottle slipped from his grip. It hit the edge of the thick oak table and shattered. Dark red liquid exploded outward, splashing across the white linen tablecloth, Leo's untouched plate, and Dominic's expensive suit jacket. The sharp, overwhelming stench of bitter almonds filled the suffocating air of the private room. Chaos erupted in a fraction of a second. "What the fuck?" Dominic roared, surging to his feet, knocking his heavy chair backward. His men reached for the inside of their jackets. Victor didn't hesitate. He recovered his balance instantly, pivoting on his heel. His Glock was in his hand and leveled at Dominic's chest before the capo could even draw a breath. The 2 guards stationed at the door racked the slides of their weapons, the sharp, metallic clacks echoing like thunder. "Nobody moves!" Victor snarled. his voice a lethal guttural command. Lara was on the floor. She had fallen hard on her knees, the shattered glass cutting into her silk trousers. Her hands were wet with the spilled wine. She looked up at Leo. Leo hadn't moved a muscle. He was still sitting perfectly upright. He looked at the rapidly expanding red stain on the white tablecloth. He inhaled slowly through his nose. He looked down at Lara. "Cyanide," Lara whispered, her voice shaking violently. She held up her hands, the red liquid dripping from her fingers. "It smells like almonds. The straw was sterilized, so the smell wouldn't transfer to the wood." Leo slowly turned his head to look at Dominic. The capo was frozen, his hands half raised in surrender, a bead of sweat tracing a line down his pale cheek. "You brought me poisoned wine, Dominic," Leo said. His voice was soft, reasonable, and utterly devoid of mercy. "Leo, I swear to God, I didn't know," Dominic stammered, the bravado completely gone from his eyes. "The broker in Verona—" "Victor," Leo interrupted softly. "Yeah, boss." "Take Dominic and his men to the warehouse." Leo stood up, picking up his cane. He didn't look back as he walked toward the door. "Lara, get up, we're leaving." The ride back to the estate was suffocatingly silent. Lara sat perfectly rigid in the back seat of the SUV, staring out the tinted window at the blurred city lights. It was raining again, the droplets streaking across the glass like dirty tears. Her knees throbbed where she had hit the floor. The smell of bitter almonds seemed permanently burned into the lining of her nose. She had just condemned 3 men to a slow, agonizing death in a dockside warehouse. She had saved Leo again, but this time it didn't feel like a medical rescue. It felt like she had pulled the trigger herself. When they arrived at the estate, the heavy iron gates closed behind them with a metallic clang that sounded exactly like a prison door locking. Leo didn't go to his study. He walked straight to his private sitting room, the same room where Lara had found the lead-leaching decanter. He bypassed the new safe crystal bottles and walked to the small wet bar. He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into 2 heavy tumblers. He walked over to where Lara stood awkwardly by the doorway and held one out to her. "Drink," he ordered softly. Lara took the glass. Her fingers brushed against his. His skin was warm, a stark contrast to the cold dread settling in her stomach. She brought the glass to her lips and swallowed. The liquor burned a fiery trail down her throat, settling heavily in her chest. Leo took a slow sip of his own drink, leaning heavily on his cane. He looked at her, really looked at her. "You're shaking," he said. "I'm fine," Lara lied, her voice cracking in the middle. "You're not fine," Leo corrected gently. He stepped closer. The proximity made Lara's breath catch. "You just realized that the line between saving a life and ending one is razor thin, and you just crossed it." "I didn't want them to die," Lara whispered, a hot tear escaping and tracking down her cheek. I smelled the almonds." "If you hadn't smelled it, I would be dead on the floor of that restaurant, and Victor would have been shot by Dominic's men," Leo said, his voice a low, rhythmic hum. "You didn't start the war, Lara. You just decided who survived the first battle." He reached out. Lara flinched instinctively, but Leo didn't strike her. His large, rough hand, the hand of a man who had built an empire through violence, gently cupped her jaw. His thumb brushed away the tear on her cheek. The gesture was shockingly tender, completely at odds with the brutal reality of the night. "Why do you keep doing it?" Leo asked softly, his dark eyes searching hers. You hate this. You hate me. Yet you threw yourself in front of a bullet you couldn't even see. Lara's breathing hitched. She looked up at him. She saw the exhaustion lines around his eyes, the gray pallor that still clung to his skin, the absolute crushing loneliness of a man who couldn't trust a single soul on earth except the maid he had blackmailed. Because you're broken, Lara breathed, the truth slipping out before she could catch it. Because nobody else looks at you and sees a person. They just see the money or the power. I just see a man who keeps drinking poison because he doesn't know how to stop. Leo's breath hitched. For a fraction of a second, the untouchable Mafia boss shattered. He looked completely, utterly undone by her words. He stepped into her space, closing the gap between them. His cane clattered to the floor, forgotten. He wrapped his free arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. Lara gasped, her hands instinctively coming up to grip the lapels of his suit jacket. It wasn't a soft, romantic embrace. It was desperate. It was the grip of a drowning man clinging to the only piece of driftwood in the ocean. He leaned down, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He breathed her in, the smell of the rain on her coat, the sharp tang of the spilled wine on her hands, the raw, unfiltered humanity she carried. Don't leave me, Leo whispered against her skin, a terrifyingly vulnerable confession ripped from the throat of a monster. I'll give you anything. I'll burn the city down for you. Just don't let me go back to the dark alone. Lara stood frozen, her heart hammering against his chest. She should push him away. She should run. This man was a killer, a tyrant, a cage made of money and threats. But as she felt his heavy, frantic heartbeat against hers, she slowly raised her arms. She wrapped them around his broad shoulders, sinking her fingers into the expensive wool of his coat. She anchored him to her. She was the maid who found the poison. And now, she realized with a sickening, thrilling clarity, she was the only cure he had left. Did Lara make the right choice? Or did she just trade one prison for another? The line between survival and complicity is razor thin, and Lara's walking a tightrope over an empire of blood. If you love this deep dive into loyalty, betrayal, and the toxic romance of the underworld, hit that like button. Make sure to share this story with your friends who love grounded, high-stakes drama. What would you have done in Lara's shoes? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more intense, original storytelling.